August 1942. Guadalcanal, a green wall that swallows sound and hope. I step off the trail and the air grabs my throat. Vines cling like wire, the soil reeks of iron. We were told Americans feared the jungle. That night, and steel would decide it for us. Then Henderson Field coughs to life after bombardment again, and SBDs drop from cloud like knives. At the Tanaru flares bloom. A water-cooled Browning speaks without pausing, and men vanish into grass that spits fire back. The truth arrives like rain. We are not fighting men. We are colliding with the machine. Before the island corrected us, confidence felt eternal. In Rabul's briefing, Hutt's chalk arrows ran bold toward a soft enemy, mechanized, clumsy, chained to roads in daylight. Our creed was night silent, march bayonet shock resolve that splits a line like bamboo. We carried the certainty of veterans Nanking, Malaya, the Philippines, each a testament to will sharpened by scarcity. The officers spoke of decisive blow, a single violent thrust to cut the enemy airfield and roll their beachhead into the sea. Maps showed trails like open doors. Doctrine promised jungle as ally. Our kit matched the Faith light packs, knee mortars for close punctuation, long rifles, oiled thin boots ready for mud. Rations would be lean, so what hunger had marched with us before. Destroyers of the Tokyo Express would race supplies down the slot. What they could not carry, spirit would. We rehearsed signals in the dark-wrapped rifle bolts against glare and told ourselves Americans feared rain fever and night. When the first barges nosed toward Guadalcanal, we believed we were bringing certainty ashore. We would take the ridge, silence the runway, and prove again that will defeat's weight. The island waited to disagree. We laughed because the arithmetic seemed simple. Americans were heavy, everyone said so. Their war moved on roads, on docks, on tidy timetables with quartermasters who saluted clipboards. In the jungle, roads, rot docks wash away, and timetables become jokes told by rain. We had marched on hunger before. They carried kitchens. We had learned to read darkness by the taste of the air. They needed lamps and maps. They were brave enough, perhaps, but bravery inside steel airplanes, tractors, radios that talk too loudly to demons in the ether. Strip the steel away and you meet soft hands, slow feet men who curse the leech and the fever, as if the island should apologize. Doctrine made our contempt efficient. We prized the knife fight close, quick, decided by will and inches. Under canopy sight, lines collapsed to a whisper. The long American habit of open-order rifle fire and formal artillery programs would tangle in vines. Put them under trees, and they would shoot the trees. Put them in rain, and they would drown in their own discipline. Their armored fantasies would rust at the waterline. Their trucks would sink, their radios would gasp when the clouds pressed low. Our lightness was not poverty, but edge-rolled rice knee mortars you could carry like a child, grenades counted like prayer beads, boots built to forgive a bad trail. We could move where supply tables said not recommended. We mocked their perimeter lines on a map, a waist-high circle of fear. A perimeter is a promise you make to the enemy, find the seam. We believed we knew seams, ravines that run like veins beneath grass, dead ground a map cannot see. We would use the night to crawl inside their arcs and cut a hole big enough for a regiment to pour through. We had done it before against armies that also trusted the straight line and the schedule. The Americans fresh to the Pacific would be worse, green, loud, glowing with cigarettes and eagerness. Their supposed advantages felt like traps for them, not for us. Air power needs sky, and the jungle keeps the sky for itself. Bombs and dive angles are theater pieces performed at curtain times at dawn dusk, the very hours we learned to disappear. Naval guns, magnificent and deaf to the soft language of a creek bed under overhanging leaves. Logistics. A necklace that strangles if you pull hard enough. We would not fight their ships. We would knife their porters. We would let them bring tins and tents, and then take those same tins and tents to feed our victory. We rehearsed the catalog of American weaknesses the way a priest counts liturgy. They are road-bound, so cut the road. They are radio-bound, so jam, or kill the radio man. They are clock-bound, so arrive when the clock is wrong. They hate entanglement, give them vines. They fear rot, let the swamp eat their socks. They trust inter-service harmony, split it with pressure, make the airmen fly more than they can service, make the infantry hold more than they can wire, make the sailors shoot at shapes that change. They prize firepower, deny them targets. We would be rumor and rustle until the moment of certainty, and then we would be storm. Even our hunger looked like a weapon. A man who can fight with an empty belly is harder metal. We wore our thinness like armor. Their full mess lines seemed proof of softness. Who drinks coffee in a place like this and calls it war? We grinned at their bulldozers for what is a bulldozer against a river that moves even when it looks asleep. We smiled at their runway because runways die when the first hard rain remembers they are only dirt. Above all, we laughed at their idea of night. They lit it. We owned it. The jungle loves those who do not speak. We would be silence with a blade. Bayonets do not need batteries. A knee mortar needs one man and a habit of listening. A grenade does not misfire because a desk officer wrote the wrong number on a requisition. So we sharpened the old answers and walked off the barges, certain that the island would referee in our favor. We would teach the soft enemy jungle grammar, no lines, no clocks, no mercy. The perimeter would flex, the runway would go dark, the destroyers would quit their noisy runs, and the Americans would leave a hill of ration tins to mark a brief mistake. Contempt is a shortcut through fear. We took the shortcut gladly. Only later, much later, did we realize that contempt is also a blindfold. The first problem did not announce itself. It waited. It waited in the gaps between sounds, between the insect scream and the river hush, between the last cough of a destroyer fading up the slot and the first bird that dared insult dawn. We lay in a low fold beyond the grass faces striped with mud waiting for the order to move. The map called this ground approach as if the jungle were a hallway and doors would appear when you needed them. The jungle had other plans. It offered us silence, and in silence you can hear your own certainty unravel. Silence teaches arithmetic. How many rounds can we carry without sinking in mud? How many minutes before the atabrine taste dissolves and fever makes the hands slow? How many men will still be next to me when the flare goes white? The numbers were small and stubborn. Our destroyers had run hard last night, but the surf looked wrong, and the beach whispered of barges that did not arrive. Rice rationed thin. Grenades counted twice. A runner returned with news that wire had been heard. In front wire is not sound until you touch it, then it is a verdict. We waited for the storm, and discovered the storm was ours. Hunger heat, the little rasp in a throat that tells you a cough is coming at the worst moment. Our doctrine said the decisive blow would be fast, slide under the arcs, explode the seam, flow forward, finish by dawn. Doctrine does not mention the smell of Henderson carried strangely by the night, hot oil, trampled grass, something like coffee proof that the runway we promised to silence was still breathing, still fed. Somewhere unseen, a bulldozer coughed once like a beast clearing its throat, then quiet again. The quiet was heavier than gunfire. We sent listening patrols to taste the perimeter. They returned with careful words. No careless talk. No glowing cigarettes. No clatter as men learned to move by touch. Their wire is tied to trees at odd heights, one whispered, as if trees could plan. Trip flares buried shallow. A corporal from our squad found a low hummock and traced a rectangle in damp soil, the likely nest of a machine gun sighted to rake where we would instinctively crawl. He drew a second rectangle to left overlapping the first. The picture made our officer's mouth harden. Interlock. A Western word now a shape on our ground. Time lengthened. Waiting turns minutes into criticism. Boots too tight, socks wet too long, bolt too shiny. Each fault grows teeth in the mind. A mosquito whined near my ear, and I did not slap it, because sound has weight, and the perimeter felt like a scale. Far behind on a slope where the trees are thinner, the chaplain murmured to a man whose eyes had gone somewhere private. Fear is not disloyal, it is contagious. We watched it like we would watch a spark near dry grass. The rain came not a curtain, but a sheet of needles. Our world shrank to 2 arm lengths. The sergeant moved along the line by smell and touch, tightening our shape like a knot being drawn. He whispered times on the second flare, and distances 30 paces, and flatten until the plan sounded simple enough to survive contact with truth. We rehearsed with our eyes closed, step, pause, listen, breathe through teeth, hand to shoulder down. In the dark, plans must be memorized into muscle, because the first white blossom overhead will erase thought. We waited, and the island began to speak in the enemy's accent. Somewhere to our right, a faint scrape ammo can dragged across route, then nothing. Ahead, a click, not quite human, a trip flare spoon teasing its hinge, then nothing. Beyond that, an almost comforting war sound, the gurgle of a water jacket being topped off with a careful pour. Men who intend to fire all night tend their machines like children. We had come for a knife fight. What waited across the grass was a workshop. The order to move did not come as a shout. It was a touch and a breath at my ear, Mo. The line uncoiled, low, quiet, sure. The silence broke first under our knees, grass whispering secrets to men who wanted it to be a carpet. 10 paces, 20, 30, flatten. My cheek found the earth. My tongue found salt. A flare hissed to life as if the sky were striking a match. The world turned white and flat. Shapes we hoped were gaps turned into decisions someone else had already made. Shadows hardened into stakes, into wire, into the small black eyes of a gun that had been aiming here since yesterday. We were still in the quiet part. That was the worst of it. The storm we feared, artillery mortars, the cutter's teeth of canister, had not begun. We faced the prelude, the proof that our enemy had learned the jungle's grammar faster than our contempt could translate. Men who mock do not prepare. Men who prepare do not need to mock. In the glow and the hush, I understood that the terrible thing waiting across the grass was not hatred or even courage. It was arrangement of wire and arcs and intervals and men who had memorized where we would crawl and when we would rise. The flare died. Darkness clapped back in. Somewhere a runner fell, somewhere a corporal counted breaths, somewhere a captain redrew the assault in the wet palm of his hand. We waited for the storm again, and this time we knew its name. It was not thunder. It was system. Shift the lens. Step out of our foxhole and climb mentally into the scaffolding the enemy built long before we ever saw the island. We called it arrogance. It was in truth rehearsal on an industrial scale. Weeks before Henderson had a name, we feared men with pencils and grease under their nails were drawing roads through trees they had not met yet. At Espiritu Santo, a planner, just one among dozens, stood over a table that looked like a sawmill of paper, sliding transparent overlays like jungle leaves, surf tides, beach gradients, drag coefficients of landing craft heavy with crates that would later be names: ammunition, avgas, barbed wire, coffee. The impossible idea was not a single genius's spark. It was a committee of the relentlessly practical deciding that a runway could be a living organism if fed properly and on time. Engineers practiced with bulldozers, the way we practiced night assault. Time trials, component swaps, spare hoses coiled like snakes in labeled crates. They staged rehearsals where a dozer would pretend to die and a maintenance crew would sprint from a tent like medics to save a heart. Pontoon companies drilled a choreography of steel and tied lash pin float drop. Seabees cut prefabricated runway panels until their hands knew in the dark which edge fit, which, like carpenters who can marry joints by feel. None of it felt romantic. That is the point. Romance drains when the task is to make mud-bear airplanes. The airplane was a nested box. Fighters with short legs would hopscotch forward, staging at fields whose names were still lines on a map, while long-legged SBDs and TBFs fat with fuel learned approach paths to a strip that rain would try to erase every afternoon. The pilots were not prima donnas. They were a shift on a line. Ground crews drilled with stopwatches, engine run-ups, magneto checks, prop, governor cycles, until the sequence could be recited while drowsy. A blackboard listed spares by tail number and injury: carburetor cough, left brake drag instrument, cluster sulk. In our doctrine, pilots were knights. In theirs, pilots were interchangeable parts, respected, yes, but parts. Logistics. The thing we called a necklace to choke them had breathing rooms built along the chain. Fuel bladders stored under nets ready to push forward. Rations configured in unitized loads that could be thrown from a boat and still land usefully on a beach. Crates with redundant labels in case rain ate the first stencil. The Tokyo Express was speed. Their convoys were endurance. Where our plan relied on a single clean thrust, theirs assumed friction and designed around it. If a boat missed, another followed. If wire ran short, strand counts could be recomputed and gaps filled with stakes cut on sight. The cleverness was not in brilliance, but in an allergy to single points of failure. Infantry prep looked almost cruel in its ordinariness. Not grand speeches, but endless camps with men learning to dig the same hole the right way every time. Intervals paced out with a tape measure. Fields of fire flagged and then erased. Squad leaders drilled 2 up 1 back, but also no heroics if a machine gun lives 5 men live to feed it. Mortarmen learned to tune their ears narumo to the pitch of a 60 mm leaving the tube, and could in rain adjust a mill without looking. Bayonet drills existed, but they were punctuation, not prose. Signals did their own quiet magic. Wire teams rehearsed laying lines in the dark without choking a trail. They knew which trees took staples and which swallowed them. Field switchboards were built like Lego plug sets, spare buzzers, the whole nest wrapped in oiled cloth for the hour the sky would empty a river on the trench. Radio nets had prearranged brevity for everything that mattered. Cactus green, meaning runway ready. River red, meaning a sector about to drown in men. They deglamorized communication so it would survive fear. Naval fire plans, those thunder rolls we cursed at Tanaru, and the ridge were not improvisations, but recipes. Plotters at sea practiced walking shells across imaginary clearings, while destroyers rehearsed illumination arcs learning where to stitch light without blinding the men waiting under it. Powder charges and fuse settings migrated to the muscle memory of gun crews who could be woken by a hand on a shoulder and fall into a ballet whose steps had been drilled through boredom into reflex. None of this looked like a single eureka. That was our mistake, searching for a villain or a genius. The American genius was procedural. The impossible idea was this: turn the jungle from adversary to workplace by refusing to be impressed by it. When a dozer bogged, they did not curse the gods. They cribbed under the tracks and jacked by inches. When rain erased the runway's skin, they bolted more skin. When malaria stalked, they made medicine a ritual and painted it bitter on every tongue. They traded myth for checklists. I think of one small scene, the kind that explains a campaign better than a map. An engineer, sleeves rolled, listening with a wooden dowel pressed to an engine block, as if to a door. He nods, calls for a part by name and number. The part appears from a crate fetched by a man who did not know yesterday that such a part existed. 10 minutes later, the machine purrs, and a truckload of pierced steel planking goes forward to become runway. No hymn plays. No flag waves. The line advances one unglamorous unit of work. Now multiply that by thousands and hang it around the neck of an island. That is the impossible idea. We laughed because we mistook their lack of theatrics for weakness. The island taught us to translate. Preparation scaled and layered becomes inevitability. First the light. Destroyers slide along the slot at night, black against black, teeth clenched around their speed. At a signal you cannot see stars fall sideways, illumination shells riding parachutes. The jungle becomes a theater stage cut from silver. But watch where the light lands. Not on our eyes. It splashes shallow behind and to the flank, so silhouettes bloom where a machine gun wants them, not where a man would prefer. That is not luck. It is a table of angles computed in quiet rooms and practiced at sea until gunners could sketch arcs with their wrists. Then the thunder naval guns that do not so much fire as edit the landscape. A curtain of 5-inch bursts walks tree to tree, and the jungle, which usually swallows force and gives back muffled grunts, suddenly conducts like a bell. We lay flat and feel roots vibrate. The salvos are not random. They sow seams, a line of airbursts to make men embrace the earth. A follow-on of ground bursts to punish that embrace. Between those commas, mortars begin to write their sentences. Listen for the mortar thunk, the cleanest sound war produces. The 60s and 81s have already solved the geometry of our ravine. We thought it dead ground. They had pre-registered it. A forward observer earlier paced off to a termite mound and counted his steps to a fallen trunk, so now a quiet correction drop 50 left 2 makes bombs walk like a god with short patience. Where the mortar cannot reach with grace, a 75 mm pack howitzer speaks. We used to laugh at its toy size until we watched a piece broken into mule loads reassemble on a spur that looked steep enough to forgive any sin. It kicks, settles, and begins to punch holes in the places where courage alone had planned to stand. Air arrives, not as shock, but as schedule sorties bracketed by dawn and dusk. The air we once dismissed as theater now punching to the beat of the ground fight. SBDs come down the sunline dive breaks, singing bombs tucked to cut the corner of a grove where a company breathed 10 minutes ago. F4Fs scissor low, their guns stitching the seam between hesitation and retreat. The Cactus Air Force is not grand, not a silver armada. It is a daily grind. Launch, strike, land, refuel, patch, launch. You can set your watch by the fuel drums rolling, the tools clinking the chalk on the ops board, changing numbers with a janitor's indifference. On the ground, the line acts like a machine with senses. A Browning water-cooled never runs alone. Two men feed it, one eyes the belt like a priest at sacrament, the other strokes the jacket, taps the cap, ensures the coolant doesn't boil. The gun quiet, runners carry belts looped over shoulders, learning to move as if heavy cloth were a living thing that must not snag. When the gun chats long enough for you to hope it will tire, a crewman swaps barrels or on the water-cooled, simply continues because someone calculated the gallons needed and someone else hauled them in the dark. These calculations are the secret sauce audacity quantified. Infantry waves do not crash, they pulse. When one squad hits its limit of adrenaline and ammunition, the next is already unrolling to replace it. A lieutenant who looks 17 checks a watch, face dabbed with grease to kill its shine, then lifts a hand and the platoon steps forward as if pulled by a quiet rope. There is no heroic shout. The sound you remember is the click of safeties disengaging in chorus. Where we expect a dramatic rush, they deliver a measured push enough to take a fold in the ground, not enough to outrun the mortar's umbrella. Their secret is patience expressed as tempo. The wire, yes, the wire is music too. It is not just a tangle to trip men, it is an instrument to reveal them. Trip flares are tuned to heights we prefer to crawl, not stand. Stakes are angled to funnel without being seen. Listening posts sit forward like whiskers connected by lines late at night by men who can staple blind. When contact comes, the perimeter does not wake with surprise. It shifts to a pre-planned arrangement. Overlapping cones of fire bloom like petals you only see when flares paint them. Communications refuse to be glorious and therefore survive. Field phones hum rather than sing. Line crews keep them alive with splices wrapped in oilskin. On a ridge, a switchboard the size of a suitcase holds a small city together. Calls are short-coded by brevity lists that steal drama's oxygen. 2 mics steal on creek bend. In 2 minutes, steel walks the creek bend. No one argues. The gun line does not need your story. It needs your grid. And then the detail we mocked into legend: maintenance. In the lull between plastering a gully and repelling a probe, an armorer strips a Browning as if laying out a noon meal: spring here, pin there, rag folded like a napkin. An engine mechanic runs a hand over a magneto and frowns. 10 minutes later, the pilot, who will bet his life on that frown, is taxiing. A medic's sleeves yellowed with atabrine stains hands out tablets with the inevitability of sunrise. This is the viscous layer between plan and performance, the grease in the gears. It looks like nothing. It is everything. By the hour when night should have reclaimed the field, and our doctrine says the enemy will blink, Henderson glows like a low, angry planet. Not bright, careful. Lamps hooded. Men speaking soft. But the hum is unmistakable. Pumps, generators, fuel sloshing a prop, dissing air on the far end as a maintenance run kisses the edge of flight. We had thought the day belonged to them, and the night to us. Their sauce dissolves that border. Illumination blooms where they want it. Darkness settles where they ask it to. And between those kingdoms walk men who have memorized the island's floor plan. At Tanaru, the sauce tasted like canister coins of iron, skipping through grass at a height chosen to ruin a man lying brave. On the ridge, it tasted like a 37mm clearing its throat, then speaking in a steady paragraph, until the paragraph became a page, and the page a book. On the Matanikau, it tasted like 105s arriving with a flat, godless finality that made arguments about courage embarrassing. The secret was no secret, not really. Numbers rehearsed, tools tended, light placed, fire timed, men rotated. A runway treated as a lung, not a thing. A perimeter treated as a living diagram, not a line. We came to break will with shock. They smothered shock with system until even our fear learned their schedule. 12 to 13. September 1942. Night pours down like hot tar over the south of Henderson Field, the ridge a broken spine of grass and scrub. Orders move along the line as touches, not words. The captain passes me in the dark, shoulders wet, voice a thread. Hold until the flare, then forward. The map in his head is clean. The world is not. We crowd the draw, breathing each other's fear, and the jungle tilts toward us like a roof about to collapse. The first flare blooms a white flower nailed to the sky, and with it the plan comes apart in 3 places at once. On our left, a platoon surges early. Someone counted too fast. Someone's watch face lied, and the men crawl straight into wire that wasn't on the sketch. They disappear into a hail that sounds like dry rice dumping from a sack. Browning fire, low-disciplined, indifferent to posture or prayer. In the center, our knee mortars pop with their familiar comforting coughs, bombs arc blossom, and the gap we thought we opened reveals itself as bait. Machine guns roll their traverse and stitch the exact strip of grass that our doctrine told us a man will choose when a flare dies. To the right, a runner returns pale and silent. His officer, the only compass for 3 squads, has vanished in a sudden, obscene punctuation of shell burst. The line drawn fine and straight by daylight staff is now a frayed rope in wet hands. Command tries to reweave it. The battalion net crackles with clipped syllables and static. Field phones hum on the slope behind us. The wire team curses roots and ground too hard for staples. A staff voice meant to sound like iron keeps repeating "advance, advance," as if the verb alone could build a bridge over the gully where men are piling. Our company commander, a precise man who once corrected my salute, crawls forward to find the seam himself. He returns with a bandage dark on his sleeve and a new voice. We anchor here. A small order suddenly sane in a night that treats plans like leaves. The Americans do not counterattack with a shout. Their reply is mechanical. Illumination shifts no longer above us but falling behind and to the side so our shadows lengthen across open ground. Our stomachs understood a second too late. Their mortars start to walk a pattern so exact you could set fence posts in the craters when morning comes. Our radio man tries to talk over the falling iron and discovers that language has grown heavy. He collapses into fragments. Left fixed, cannot, the handset passes to me, hot as a kettle. I hear a distant Lieutenant American calmly counting. Hold, 2, shift, and their gun line obeys the count, the way a heart obeys a metronome. We push again, because there is no alternative story left. A young sergeant with a child's face rolls through the wire on his back legs, kicking like a swimmer. He makes it to a slight hump and flattens mouth open in a grin that has nothing to do with joy and signals us on with 2 fingers. 3 men join him, then 5. The gap we feel, almost smell, narrows, then tightens, then disappears under a sound like someone tearing cloth in long strips. The hump was not cover. It was an aiming stake. A 37mm begins to speak in coins of iron. The sergeant's grin goes out like a candle. Behind us, the staff's map loses its promises. Casualty reports stop being numbers and become silent squads that do not answer platoons that answer with a stranger's voice. The chaplain who in daylight preached thin comfort works the rear slope with a canteen and a hand on cheeks, keeping breath moving in bodies that would rather stop. A cook, whose name I do not know, drags a crate of shells forward because the thin boys who should be doing it are gone. On the left, our reserve never large commits early to plug a hole we swear did not exist when we rehearsed. On the right, the ground itself betrays us. A drainage cut that looked like an alley turns into a dead end, touched by interlocking arcs we never saw until flares made them law. There is courage everywhere. This is not the problem. Men rise into the white light to haul a friend, then go down with him. A corporal crawls into the shallow ditch where a machine gun nests, and with 1 grenade left, tries to rearrange the war. He dies inches from success, and the gun resumes as if clearing its throat. A lieutenant assembles a new assault from men who do not know each other's names. He counts them, smiles, lies, we are many, and sends them forward. They come back fewer and older. By midnight, The ridge is a ledger with too many red lines. Our company thread is knotted, our battalion rope frayed. The colonel, a silhouette on the rear crest, refuses to cede the idea that still lives on paper that we can take the field in one violent gulp. But the gulp is strangling. The destroyer's distant thunder answers no prayer here. The boats cannot climb a hill. Radios have become rosaries. Each press of the key is a bead you finger because it is the only movement left to make. Toward dawn, the rain pulls a gray sheet over everything. The last coordinated attempt dissolves not in spectacle, but in arithmetic. Too few grenades, too little space, too many interlocked lines of sight that belong to someone else's plan. The men who remain have the eyes of those who have solved an equation and do not like the answer. When the final flare of the night hisses, we do not surge. We hold breath, count heartbeats, and try not to move. The ridge rejects us. Command still speaks into handsets that hiss back like snakes. The machine on the opposite slope hums unexcited awake, ready to resume on the tick of its chosen clock. We came to prove that will can break a line. We discovered that will unmeasured breaks itself first. Dawn does not arrive. It reveals. The ridge, which at night was a scream and a prayer, in morning is a diagram. You can see where the wire runs and why. You can see the angles the machine guns chose, the little trench lips that deny you heads-down safety, the stakes hammered at heights that capture a crawling man's elbows. The map in the staff tent never drew these details. They were made by hands that had time and a habit of thinking in inches. We count what is left. The numbers are a cruelty that confirms what our nerves already know. Platoon roles are recited as if names themselves can reanimate men. The medic's book is thick with pages that stick. The chaplain's hands shake only when he is still, so he does not stop moving. A runner brings the first true report we have heard in days. The beach is wrong again. Surf-up boats light the destroyers running, but not landing what the ridge demanded. We used to mutter that hunger makes steel of a man. Hunger makes glass clear, sharp, brittle. The Americans do not pursue with banners. They resume. It is worse. By mid-morning, Henderson coughs up airplanes as if the night's violence were an inconvenience, not an argument. We feel the air in our teeth before we see the sun flash on a canopy. Dive sirens do their theater, but the real insult is on the ground. Engines start tools, clink drums, roll, and the chalkboard changes numbers. The field breathes. Our officers who promised us the runway would die if we bled at the right place open their mouths and find no words that survive this sight. Along the line, the enemy does not gloat. He tightens. Listening posts crawl forward to the limit of nerve and sound, like insects in the grass. A wire team, which must have worked through the night, hauls a new strand into a gap. We thought we had torn staples. It tests it with a glove, moves on. The water-cooled guns, which we prayed would crack, continue their dull, workmanlike chatter. Where a barrel smokes, a can appears. A hand tips liquid steam, hisses, the gun keeps counting. We realize that we are not fighting a bravery that flags with fatigue. We are fighting a process that budgets for fatigue and pays the bill without complaint. Our command system does not collapse all at once. It thins. The battalion net can still pass verbs, hold shift refuse, but nouns go missing: who, where, how many. The colonel's runner returns with a message that is mostly mud and a torn edge. We begin to use landmarks that shame us where Taro fell, the stump that looks like a man because grid references assume a map we can no longer pretend to read. Orders simplify into reflex: if it moves and is not ours, shoot. If it is wire, cut. If it is hunger, ignore. This is not doctrine. This is drowning. A prisoner filters back through rumor, a man who stumbled into their line in the night and was not killed because they wanted to count him. He returns to us later, traded by fate with a story we can barely absorb: coffee in tin mugs, a canteen line where medics inspect tongues for atabrine yellow, a sergeant reading a list of duties the way a clerk reads invoices. The detail that breaks something inside me is small. Someone swept a walkway with a palm frond. In this place, under artillery. As if the war were a job you could do tidily. By afternoon, the realization settles not as a shout, but as climate. We try one more probe along a finger ridge. It advances 30 paces and meets a prepared paragraph of fire machine guns, then mortars, then a pack gun, then silence, exactly long enough for us to imagine moving. Then the paragraph repeated with a different punctuation. The timing is inhuman, because it is human plus rehearsal. Our best men are the first to be spent. The rest of us learn an obedience that feels like erosion. Toward evening, the destroyers return to rake Henderson, and for a minute the old hope stirs. The runway will go blind, the planes will cower, the Americans will feel what we feel. The guns lash the strip, flames lick, the jungle throws back the sound. By the time the last salvo fades, men in stained dungarees are already hauling panels, pushing rollers, patching holes in patterns they have practiced. As dusk gives way to night, an engine coughs, catches levels. An airplane hurries down a runway that was an hour ago a statement against possibility. We do not have a word for this in our vocabulary of Elan. We borrow theirs maintenance. When darkness finally owns the sky, the night we assumed belonged to us belongs to them by appointment. Illumination hangs where they need it. Patrols move with a patience we once mistook for fear. We hear muffled voices speaking brevity, not bravado. We hear a shovel gentle adjusting a parapet for an angle that will matter when we come. In that sound, work after victory, we understand we are not being opposed by an army that tires when it wins. We are being absorbed into a schedule. Men do not break in dramatic ways. A private, polite and brave, asks for water and says please, and the please is wrong. Because it is a word from a world where requests are answered. A sergeant checks his bayonet edge by habit, then leaves it sheathed, because there is nowhere to run that a diagram has not already measured. An officer who never lied tells us we will attack again at moonrise, and cannot make his mouth speak the last syllable. The ridge and the field and the river and the slot and the stars overhead all seem to whisper the same sentence. This is not about you. We came to crush a position and found a way of war that does not argue. It counts. It stacks. It schedules. It looks at rain and says bring more gravel at hunger, and says move the tins at fear, and says change the shift. When at last we look across the short grass and admit what we are seeing, shame and awe arrive together. We are not losing to courage alone. We are being pressed methodically by a machine that makes courage abundant and therefore cheap. The realization is not a scream. It is a bowing of the head you cannot stop. Guadalcanal ended more than a battle. It collapsed an approach to war. Our plan had been speed and decisiveness, a thrust that shattered an airfield, a fleet that fed victory by night, a morale that could outstare hunger. On the ridge and along the Guadalcanal, that plan met a different arithmetic. The Americans proved that with enough engineers, fuel wire, and patience, terrain becomes an accessory rather than an obstacle. We were forced to relearn strategy under duress. After Henderson refused to die, initiative left our side like a tide turning on rock. Destroyers that once felt like daggers became ambulances racing starvation. Pilots we could not replace were spent against a runway that breathed every morning. Small craft and barges, precious for islands we had not yet fought for, burned at the beach in the name of a position we could no longer take. The Tokyo Express turned into a treadmill whose miles produced no ground. From that point forward, our choices narrowed. The decisive battle we had trained to force became a series of recoveries we could not finance. We shifted to defense not because doctrine preached it, but because logistics handcuffed us to it. The Solomons unspooled like a manual for industrial war we could not read. New Georgia Bougainville, the slow strangulation of Rabaul, not reduced by storming, but neutralized by a schedule. Each step required the enemy to repeat what Guadalcanal had taught them: lay wire-set fields of fire, register mortars, keep engines alive, and they repeated it without drama. The strategic consequences were not limited to maps. Confidence, our true currency, devalued. Officers stopped promising one blow and started promising endurance, a word that sounds like strategy when you have nothing else to sell. Our fleets conserved hulls, our garrisons rationed boldness. Meanwhile, the enemy's machine grew healthier by the month, feeding on its own momentum. Guadalcanal was the proof of concept. The rest of the campaign was production. The war ceased to be about who dared more and became about who could afford to dare every day. In that economy, we were poor. Years later, I try to tell my son what the island taught us, and the words keep slipping into small things, the way flares carved petals of light over grass. The way a water-cooled gun spoke all night because someone counted gallons. The way a bulldozer coughed at dusk and a runway answered at dawn. He wants heroes and villains. The jungle gave us routines. I remember a patrol near the Lunga when rain wrote its alphabet on leaves. We found a length of wire newly strung, still smelling of metal, stapled to a tree at a height that would catch a crawling man's sleeve. There were boot prints, broad, clumsy, we used to say. Next to them, a palm frond that had been used as a broom. Under artillery, in a place where even breath felt contraband. I could not explain to my squad why that detail broke me more than the guns did. It meant someone had decided that order would live here no matter what the sky shouted. I remember the sound a 60mm mortar makes when a crew that trusts each other starts to play it like a drum. The forward observer murmured numbers as if pricing fruit. The bombs did not fall with hate. They fell with competence. That is harder to outlast. Hate tires. Competence clocks in. When I dream, it is not of charges and banners. It is of maintenance, a sleeve rolled a dowel to an engine block, a nod, the right part fetched from the right crate, a propeller, dissing air, where an hour ago there was a hole torn by naval guns. In the dream, I understand again what we refused to say at the time. Bravery that shows up to work on time with a toolbox is a different species of war. If I must give him one sentence, I make it plain, because the jungle taught us to stop lying to ourselves. We were not fighting a man or even an army in the way our fathers meant it. We were fighting a system that turned mud into schedule and fear into inventory. We were fighting a machine.